advising clients across the country. Here he is, your host, J. Christopher Boyd.
Good afternoon and welcome to Something More with Chris Boyd. My name is Jeff Perry and I'm sitting in for Chris this week. And we have a full show this next 2 hours. Right after I introduce the show, we're going to bring in Scott Birmingham, who's a certified financial planner with Asset Management Resources. And I'm going to ask him a tough question. And the question is going to be, what does it cost to retire comfortably? And we're going to get into the different amount it takes to live in different states. There's an article that came out recently that outlines that. And we'll talk about Massachusetts, certainly. I'm in Florida. Scott's in Tennessee. So we're going to bounce around the East Coast here and try to put some numbers to this. Also in the second hour, I'm going to have Taylor White, who's the Sandwich Town clerk in. Taylor is going to talk about why local elections matter. You know, our news cycle focuses on the big elections, for president, and then sometimes we get attention for senators and Congress and district attorneys and so forth. But local election season is in Massachusetts right now. And so let's hear from Taylor why people don't vote and why it's so important that you do in these local elections. Cathi Ingersoll, our marketing director, is going to join us and talk about what's going on at Asset Management Resources, including a very informative complimentary seminar coming up soon next month on Social Security issues and questions. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up and Cathi will tell you how. In an hour or two, we're going to spend the entire hour with our Chief Financial Officer, Brian Regan. There's a lot going on in the market. A lot of corporate earnings are out. We're all still thinking about inflation, recession, interest rates. So I have a lot to talk to Brian about in an hour or two. But for this next segment, let me introduce Scott Birmingham, a certified financial planner with Asset Management Resources. Scott, thanks for joining the show.
Sure, no problem.
I know that you're the guy in our organization that takes a look at or creates, and certainly looks at others, but takes a look at every financial plan that we do, creates most of them. And, like most financial planners, we're dealing with people of all ages, but one of the bigger questions in financial planning is when people start to get thinking about that retirement time frame, right? Some people start earlier than others, granted, but
Sure.
Sometimes, people are like asking that question in their 40s, which is probably smart, but usually it's when they're a few years away. And the question is, can I afford to retire and do I have enough money and all these things? So how do you approach someone when they're kind of green, they're coming in and they're saying, I'm thinking of retiring, can I?
Sure. So yeah, people want to know what's my number, or not too many people want to come in and say, what can I spend? Saying some folks want to max it out. But I think we're a little jaded as financial planners. So the people that are usually coming in to see us, I think, have a shot at providing for a healthy retirement income, versus I think a lot of people who haven't saved enough are probably not the ones popping into a financial advisor's office because they don't want to hear the bad news, which is kind of a shame, because I think you can make a lot of course corrections in your 40s and even in your 50s.
Right.
But if somebody walks in the door, how do I look for retirement? Do I have enough? We're essentially looking at all their assets, all their income, what they're currently doing for savings, what saving opportunities they might have through work, debt. How's that working? Paying down? You're paying a lot on your credit card, your home. So we're looking at a whole financial picture, where you are today. And then we're going to make some projections on where we think you'd be by retirement, and what adjustments could you make now to put you in a better shape for retirement.
So obviously those suggestions about, tweaks in their spending or tweaks in their investing have more impact the younger they are. I think about this like as if you're driving like a cruise ship or a big ship and you're trying to reach that destination of retirement. And the closer you get to your destination, it's a lot tougher to turn that ship to reach that destination. But if you're, in the example you used, 40 years old, suggestions, additions, subtractions from your lifestyle can take those small turns on that cruise ship analogy. I don't know if I'm articulating it well, and help you get to that destination without crashing into the rock, so to speak.
No, I think it's a good analogy. And it's tough. So especially if you have kids and they're college age, you're not ready to turn that ship yet because there's still a lot of expenses and life's going to change dramatically when the kids get out of the house. And maybe that's the time where you can make some big changes. But often that might be pushed out to your, maybe closer to 50. But if you can courage up and take a look at your finances and start looking at early the corrections and the thought processes and how you spend and save, even if you can't make dramatic changes, then knowing that you have to do some course corrections, I think makes a huge difference.
All right, so let's talk about some data from this article that I was referring to. The title of the article is What It Costs to Retire Comfortably in Every State. It was written by Samuel Stebbins on April 18th. So, let me put out this big caveat, and you know it better than I do. You've been doing this for decades. Every person, every couple, every family is different on their spending. So the good thing about these articles and these conversations is it hopefully gets people thinking about this issue. The bad thing is these averages may not mean anything to you at all. You may hear these averages about what people spend and say, they spend that much, or I can't live on that. It's very individualized. That's why it's important to work with a financial advisor that you trust, someone's a fiduciary, someone that knows your goals, your fears, all those things we talk about every week, so that you can get real data. You can't rely on articles or averages to guide you, because who knows what's behind these numbers. But just to set the stage, in Massachusetts, the median income for people living comfortably in retirement is $89,000 a year. That's the second highest in the nation. So if you're listening here on Cape Cod, where our office is, you live in a high income state. It takes a lot of money to live there comfortably. $89,000 would be an average. Now, Scott, you're in Tennessee. You're the 10th lowest.
Yes, I am. Yep.
And that is probably what's going on with the population in Tennessee and people moving from California or Massachusetts. I'm sure you see a lot of people from all over the country moving to Tennessee.
Huge influx from California, New York. So they're really expensive states, and cost of living, I think, compared to Massachusetts, I think it's 89. It's 59.
59. That's right. So I mean, that's significant. $30,000. And I'm a big weather guy, so it's not as nice as where I am, which is the next example I'm going to give you, but it's nicer than if you're up in the Northeast, New York. You get a better climate, and no state income tax, right?
No income tax. So for retirees, no tax on retirement income, no tax on your Social Security. That's a big boom. Property taxes are way at the bottom of the national averages. I won't even scare Massachusetts people by letting them know how cheap it is. I don't want them piling in here.
Well, I think they're coming anyway. I know several people who moved there. So Massachusetts 89,000, Tennessee 59,000, and since I'm in Florida, we're the 15th lowest, so more than Tennessee, but certainly less than the New England, New York states. We're at 63,000. So once again, comparable, no state income tax here, but a little bit more, $4,000 to live here in Tennessee. But I'm going to stay here for the sunshine.
Which provides you another lever to pull as you think of retirement. Do I need to relocate and save quite a bit of money on your home purchase, your property tax, income tax, cost of living? I mean, it makes an enormous difference if retirement is 25 to 30 years.
Exactly. So, let's start there with some of the specifics of how you can make this calculation. A lot of people, when they're thinking about retirement and doing their planning with us or with other people, it's the question of, should I maintain the home that I'm in? Do you downsize? I mean, that's a big decision, because sometimes the equity in one's home is the largest asset they have.
Sure.
And whether or not to well, we see it, and I'm sure you see it, not just to talk about Florida and Tennessee, but the typical thing going on here is people are cashing out of New York or the greater Boston area, Cape Cod, selling their home for $800,000, just to use a number, and coming here, and I'm probably the same thing in Tennessee, and buying a home for $400,000 of similar, meets their needs quite well.
Right. I mean,
So
that's a huge boon of the portfolio and your odds of success, have that liquidity, that excess cash.
right, certainly not just a financial question. It certainly has to do with family and comfort and what you want out of your retirement, what your vision of your retirement is, but it's often something that starts the process and starts the thinking. Let's talk about income. So according to this article, the average Social Security payment is $1,694. So if we take even $60,000 what it costs to live in Tennessee, you're not even getting close to that. So how do you look at income with individuals? What do you look at, and how do you forecast whether or not it's going to last for the rest of their life?
Sure. So again, everybody's different, but I'd say the majority of the people, if they come in and they have investments, high percentage is usually retirement income, meaning it's from their work 401k and the same amount before. So we have to make some assumptions on tax rates in the future and calculations that, you have X size portfolio, you need a certain amount of money, say it's 60,000, and maybe your Social Security is only giving you 25. How do we make up that difference?
Mm-hmm.
So we're doing things just roughly saying, we're looking at your risk tolerance. So what's your portfolio look like? What could we expect on that on average on long term? And then taking into account, you're probably going to get a little less risky in the market over the years as well. So we're not going to say you're 65% in stocks now. 10 years from now, you may not even be close to that. You may be 50% or lower. So we have to make some conservative assumptions on that as well. So basically, we're looking at your portfolio. How much do we think it can produce as we get that portfolio a little more conservative? Also, we have to take into account your expenses are going up every year. We have to take into account healthcare costs, which are going up at an even higher rate every year. So there's a whole bunch of input and thoughts in there. But everybody has a lot of moving parts. We're trying to account for as many as we can.
So let's talk about someone who's got, let's say they have $500,000 in a 401k that they've rolled over into an IRA, and they want to know, is that money going to last? And so I think we're more aware of this because of the volatility in the markets right now. We had some really good years. Last year was not so good. There's a lot of geopolitical tensions going on. People, and the news is certainly not helping anybody by just pounding us with all these things that are about to go crazy in the world. So people's concerns, I guess, about life, and everything they worry about, including money, is higher. I know you do something in your software called Monte Carlo simulations. Tell us about that and why it's important to give somebody, an accurate vision of how their money's going to do, say, over the next 25, 30 years.
Sure. So some folks who are, keep track of the money might come in with a spreadsheet and say, I've got $500,000 at X percent. It's going to give you this money every year. Well, a spreadsheet's linear and just going to do the exact same thing every year. So your expenses will go up by the same amount every year, but also your portfolio will go up by the same amount every year. That's not realistic. So you mentioned the Monte Carlo scenario. The idea behind that is to run a large amount of simulations where in 1 year, the market may be up, again, based on your portfolio, a certain percentage. Next year, may be down. And we're going to throw in what they call fat tail scenarios, where the market has large drops like it did, 2000, COVID, things like that. The idea is, if you have a large drop in your portfolio, yet you're still taking money out every year to cover your expenses, is it going to make it through retirement? So that's what the Monte Carlo does. Runs 1,000 simulations, different scenarios of the market. Gives an idea of where you stand on that success ratio.
Great. And the thing I love about that when I'm talking to my clients and you're assisting me and going over these annual reviews and different things that we do is it actually gives them a score. I mean, it's a complicated for people who haven't done a lot with their own personal finances, or it's just not their thing. Sometimes I see in their eyes that it's complicated. We're giving them a lot of information, but then when you kind of give them a grade, right? You say you have a 50% chance of making it. That's very instructive to maybe you need to make some changes, or they get some validation when they get a score, and some clients do, of 100%. So that's a fun part of the, well, when the number's good, I should say. That's a fun part of the talking to clients every year. So how do you deal with some of the things that happen that we, maybe we don't want to plan for? Like, what if, say it's a couple, what if the husband has a long-term care event and he needs to either have home care or assisted living, or one of the spouses die early, or there's, whatever happens, these things in life that happen that it's tough to plan for because you don't know if they're going to happen.
Financial planning is all about the what ifs. What if the portfolio does poorly? What if you retire early? What if you pass away, get disabled? So we try to stress test these scenarios for all those cases and then have a healthy discussion about it. If one spouse were to go in a long-term care facility, financially, what would that look like? And then also, what would happen? Would you stay in the home? Would you downsize? Things like that. If one spouse would pass away, same question. So it gets folks thinking, one about, how they would react and what it would mean. And then also we have to stress this portfolio and how can we mitigate part of that, some of that. So there's discussion points around that, and which brings up estate planning and brings up life insurance, long-term care insurance, and thinking about the kids and what would they do and could they help. So there's this whole host of talking points that comes up.
It is true that the more information and more questions we ask clients or prospects, the more questions that they have, right? Well, Scott, thanks for your insight on this. I think this data is pretty right. I think you can live comfortably in retirement, depending on your debt, based upon these numbers, but it is a very individualized decision and numbers. So if you'd like help, if what we say makes sense to you, or you'd like to have us look at your plan or need help creating a plan, check us out on the website is amrfinancial.com, and you can always call our office at 508-771-8900. We'd be happy to speak with you and see if there's a way that we can add value to your financial planning. Thanks again, Scott.
Thank you, Jeff.
We'll be right back after this commercial break. This is Jeff Perry sitting in for Chris Boyd this week. I have a very special guest. I call him special. I call all my guests special, perhaps, but this is a gentleman that I've known for, I'm not going to count the years. It's my former chief of staff when I was a member of the House of Representatives. He's my friend, and to the rest of the world, I guess he's the town clerk in the town of Sandwich. Taylor White, welcome to the show again, Taylor.
Good to see you, Jeff.
I wanted to have you on for a segment, and I told you when I asked you, and you graciously accepted, thank you, is I wanted to talk about why local elections matter. We're in the end of April, and so on Cape Cod and many other towns in Massachusetts and, other parts of the country, they have a local elections, meaning selectmen, school committee, constable, whatever the town decides are elected positions. You're currently still elected, right? Town clerk?
As of today, yes.
Yeah, I know. It's a debate across Cape Cod and other parts of whether or not the town clerk should be elected or appointed. And we won't get into that today, but whatever the local elections are, they're happening now. And I don't know if people know the statistics or not, but for example, in the last presidential election, and this is nationwide, but I'll get your comments, whether it's the same in Cape Cod or Massachusetts, whatever you want to, well, however you want to answer. But in the last election for president, 70% of the voting eligible public registered to vote and voted. So that's pretty sad. And then when you get into the off-year elections, like every 2 years, you have the governor's election, say in Massachusetts, only 48, around 50% of the eligible voters, not registered voters, but eligible voters vote in those midterm elections. So, at least in presidential elections, most people vote. And in midterms, more than half of the people vote. But when you get to the local elections, which, if you think about it, what the president does, he makes the most news, but he doesn't control the amount of your property taxes, right? I mean, there's some big decisions, it's important, but a lot of decisions that affect you the most, meaning, is your road going to get paved? What's your property taxes? How are the schools that your children are going to in your own town? These are really important things. People don't vote. So tell us, tell us your perspective on, first, give us some stats or give us some guidelines about what percentage of the people vote in their local elections based on your experience in Sandwich and, other communities around.
Well, I certainly can't tell you why. That's been a conundrum for a very long time. My colleagues across the Cape and the Islands and across the state, that's one of the questions we often get asked. Why are these people? Why are your voters not participating in local elections? And from just a statistical standpoint, like here in the town of Sandwich, we have a $91 million budget we're going to be voting on at town meeting coming up. $91 million of tax money that is being derived from the citizens of this town. I'm sure the towns across the listening area here have similar situations. It's interesting from a perspective that we typically in a local, whether it be town meeting, there's a vast majority of the Massachusetts is governed by town meeting, whether it's town meeting or it's the local elections. The percentages of turnout are very, very low. It's embarrassing. I mean, you look at where we're getting 80-85% for a presidential election, as you said, when everyone comes out of the woodwork, everyone's excited to vote for the senator or the president. And you get somewhere between the ballpark of, maybe if you're lucky, 20%, usually a lot of times 14-15% turnout for these local elections. And that's really consistent throughout the Commonwealth, from what my colleagues tell me. And really the potency of your vote, specifically here in the town of Sandwich, we have 17,000 voters, just shy of 17,000. If you're voting, your vote is one of 17, potentially one of 17,000. So the potency of your vote versus when you're talking about voting for president, where you're getting, 150, 180 million people voting, the turnout seems greatly increased for those elections, but for the local ones, it's peanuts. And it really, to me, it's frustrating because you do see that you have a much greater influence voting in your local elections than you do necessarily in a national or a state or presidential election. I know a lot of my colleagues and myself, we've tried to do things. We've tried to put up signs. We've tried to, use social media. We've tried the best that we can to let people know these elections are happening.
Oh, I follow Sandwich, that I spent decades in Sandwich. So, and I love the town. I don't live there anymore. I'm in Florida, but I follow everything that you do in your office and, the general Sandwich news and the Cape news, and I see your efforts.
Yeah.
I saw them when I lived there, billboards and signs and newspapers and
the whole kind
everything.
of leading a horse to water sort of situation comes to mind. That we do our best to make sure for every election, whether they be the local elections or the national elections, that we get people off. So it's really a matter of interest. And there's commercials on TV when you get these state elections. You don't see any of that for local elections. You hear the radio spots in the national elections. You don't see those in local. But we do our best as clerks to just notify people and give them the opportunity to come and vote. But it is disappointing to see that you do not get a very high turnout in local elections. And I don't know if that's across the country or if it's just relative to here in Massachusetts or on the Cape. But we see very, very low turnouts unless there's a big issue like an override or a hotly contested race for some of the higher offices, be it selectmen or school committee or those types of things. But yeah, we do see it. It's very frustrating. We try to put it out there that, as I mentioned earlier, that the potency of your vote in a local election is highly more valuable, so to speak, in terms of decision making. Like I said, Sandwich has a $91 million budget. That's huge. And people need to come out and let the people know how, vote these people in where they're going to be spending that money, because it's important. But we do the best we can, like I said, proactively through all the different channels. But it's a conundrum that I haven't figured out the answer to yet.
It is super interesting because if you're at the local restaurant or the local lounge, if you will, or at the transfer station, anywhere around town, people are talking about local issues. They're complaining, they're complaining or, advocating for certain issues or certain people or roads or projects or buildings, or some of the projects, whether they involve an override or not, are very controversial. People don't want to change the character of their town. They want to maintain things. They want better schools, all these things that we deeply care about and you should care about. it just doesn't translate into people showing up at the ballot box. And, you make a good point about having more influence. So if 2,000 people are voting, say, at the spring election in Sandwich, your vote's counting a lot more than one. So if let's be generous, if you're at 20%, which I don't think you're going to get to, I hope you do, but you're not going to get to it. But if you're at 20%, and you have 10 houses on your street, only 2 people are voting, only 2 households are voting. So in essence, you're voting for 5 households if you're the only ones, if only 2 people show up.
Yeah. And that's the thing is, and it's almost like clockwork. You look at the voting list after they come out, especially here locally, you see it's a consistent group of people that are involved. And once in a while you have other groups that come in and will vote and participate, whether it's town meeting or the local elections. But it is a valuable thing for people to understand, and if they're listening today, maybe you don't know everything that's going on in your town, and where we live busy lives now. A lot of two parents are working. There's kids involved.
Right.
Getting the time to sit down and read a warrant for a town meeting is certainly a monumental task at some point, or learning about the candidates is sometimes difficult. But people need to realize that the voting in your local elections is important. Even if you don't know everything about it, get out there, do a little bit of research. A lot of these candidates now have these, they'll do websites or Facebook profiles.
Sure.
So the information's out there, and people really do need, because these are the people that are taking your tax money and you're making policy decisions on your behalf. So it's important that, and they're affecting you locally, which is, again, you talk about the presidency. Yeah, the presidency and the senators, they're doing things sort of a macro thing, but on a micro level, which impacts you the most, it is your local officials. So.
Absolutely. I recall, people I would encourage them to vote for in the local election, either because I was helping a candidate or just trying to be a good citizen. People would often come back with the statement, well, I don't know, I might know about how I feel about this ballot question. That may be clearer to me, but I really don't know who's voting. I don't have any kids in school. I don't care about the school committee. That's not a good response, but you hear it. Or I don't care who the constable is. And so you have a choice. You can go and vote for the things that you know about. If that's your answer why you shouldn't vote because you don't know about all the things on the ballot, there's no obligation that you have to vote on everything in the ballot. If you're interested in the selectman race or you're interested in a ballot question, you can show up and just vote for the candidates or the races or the issues that you know about. And do you see that when I know the ballots are counted by machines and all, but do you see that generally in your statistics when you look at the number of people who showed up at the ballot box, say 2,000, whatever the number is, and then the number of people who blanked or didn't vote for a particular race?
Oh yeah, you see that in the numbers when the results come out. There's you're listing the total number of votes cast, and oftentimes you do see there's a discrepancy. Like say if 2,500 people voted, you're not going to have 2,000 for one candidate and 500 for another. There's a lot of situations where people only say, "Hey, my neighbor is running for constable or school committee. I want to go out and vote," or I care about this ballot question that's going to pay for a new senior center, those types of things. So yeah, people need to realize they don't have to go into the ballot box for local elections knowing everything, but if they are interested in supporting a candidate or a friend or a ballot question, they all have to vote for that. There's no obligation to vote for everything on the ballot.
So there's been a lot of changes in the way that people vote in the last, I'll say 10 years. That may be accurate, maybe not. It used to be you had to show up at your polling location during voting hours. And if you were sick or if you had a good reason, you could get an absentee ballot. But things have changed, not only in Massachusetts, but across the country with early voting, easier access, some would say, to ballots, and brings up ballot integrity questions. I'm not trying to get into all that, but generally speaking, it's a lot easier to vote than it was 10, 20 years ago. You agree with that general statement?
Yeah, I wouldn't even say 10. I think I've been in this job for almost 15 years, and leading up to 2020, the process was fairly simple and straightforward, and we've really taken a very huge monumental change in the way that things, maybe it was 2018 that kind of shifted when we started doing early voting, in-person early voting, but yeah, there's definitely there's more opportunities than there's ever been, channels in which you can cast your vote and let your voice be heard.
And we could do a whole segment on whether or not that's good because of voter integrity and all this. But the question I want to ask you is, with those changes, arguably more access, more opportunity, has it resulted in ultimately more people voting?
No.
Yeah.
The easy answer, and I'm a guy of numbers. You look at the statistics and you look at voter turnout. I mean, I can only speak, traditionally to here, because that's the only wealth of information I have. But I do see it anecdotally across the Commonwealth and beyond, is that the voter turnout historically, if you go back every 4 years to like presidential elections and midterm elections, the voter turnout, I can almost predict it within 1 or 2 to 3%, knowing what that voter turnout is going to be. And those numbers really have not shifted. There may be a slight uptick, but really nothing, nothing monumental. As far as turnout is concerned, with all of the availability now, during state elections now, there are 2 weeks of in-person early voting. Mail-in voting begins usually about 45 days prior. For state primaries, it's a week ahead of time. The polls are open the normal hours, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. But no, we have not seen a substantial uptick in overall turnout. It's basically just shifting from election day turnout to a combination of early voting and mail-in voting.
Yep. So I guess it's the people who are motivated to vote find a way to vote, and they may take advantage of the other opportunities, but it didn't result in a greater number of people showing up. And
and there's always been, as far as mail-in voting is concerned, because that's kind of the hot button issue, there's always been an element of that through what is called absentee voting, which for all intents and purposes is the same thing. But for state elections, we would get a certain number of mail-in votes, absentee votes prior to state elections, but it was nothing like we're getting now. Now we are, for state elections, the norm. It's kind of hard to put a norm on something going on for a little less than 3 years now. But we're getting anywhere between 40 to 45% of the total turnout for an election is happening through the mail. The end result percentage of turnout is still the same, but of that percentage, you're looking between 40 and 45 is just done through a different channel.
Just people making the decision to say, I'll just mail this thing in instead of driving down to the school and voting, right?
And that's the option that they've chosen, and the convenience factor is there. We won't get into the administrative part of it, but
I can say it. It's obvious that it's more work for town clerks to deal with all these different venues for voting, whether it's mail in person, early. I mean, it's a lot more complicated, and there are
people don't
including
realize
security issues, right? I mean, you can't just these ballots are all counted on election day, right?
There's a lot, of course. Well, sometimes they're pre-tabulated a week before, depending on the election and the rules that are in place. The rules have substantially changed in the last 2 to 3 years, where it has become a lot more. The micromanagement of literally 17,000 people has become sometimes unbearable, especially with the staff and the funding. I mean, the state does provide some funding. Most of the towns have been pretty good about staffing issues, but the normal way that voting used to take place, with a small amount of mail-in voting and election day voting, that is no longer the case. And having this massive amount of paperwork and administration and data entry and mailing and sorting and counting, it's made for very challenging times during elections now, especially state elections. I'll pat myself on the back, and my colleagues, we've embraced it. We're doing the best we can with what we're given, but it's definitely it's a whole new world when it comes to elections.
For sure. Well, we're going to have to cut it short. We have a commercial break coming up, but I guess the message for this is primarily your vote matters. Your vote matters when you vote for president, when you vote for Congress, when you vote for your state leaders, your representatives, senators, constitutional officers in your county. But in some ways, it matters the most who you're voting for, who's going to decide how your schools are run, if your streets are going to be paved, what your property taxes are. And what did you call it? Your vote is magnified, or what term did you use?
I said the voter potency is much greater in a local election than a national election.
Right. So every town is different. Sandwich is voting when?
Town election in Sandwich is on the 4th of May. Our town meeting's on Monday. All across the state, this is the time of the year where these town meetings and town elections take place, first couple weeks in May.
If you've never voted in a town election, maybe this is the year to start a new trend. Your vote really matters. It directs your leadership, it directs your policies, and it directs your taxes. So get out there and vote. Taylor, thanks for joining us, and thanks for all that you do for the citizens of Sandwich and the residents of Cape Cod.
You're welcome anytime.
And we're going to be right back after this break and bring in Cathi Ingersoll, our marketing director, to talk about what's new at Asset Management Resources. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Something More with Chris Boyd. I'm Jeff Perry, sitting in for Chris this week, and I want to thank Taylor White again for coming on and, really sharing us why local elections mean so much. And if you've never voted in a local election, like we talked about with Taylor, so many people vote in the presidential elections and a little less statistically vote in the governor elections. And then when you get to the local elections, for some reason, it's 10 to 15% of the population. And those decisions being made by our local leaders about your schools, your roads, your property taxes are important. So if you've never voted in a local election, maybe this is the year to start. So thank you, Taylor, for joining us. And for this segment, I have on our Chief Marketing Officer or Marketing Director. I always get these titles mixed up.
Sounds very official, doesn't it, Jeff?
Yes. I had a boss once, a long time ago, who said, "What do you want your title to be?" So
Yeah.
I said, "Oh boy, I don't know. Let's come up with one." Anyway, thank you, Cathi Ingersoll, joining us for this segment. And I wanted to spend a few minutes talking about some opportunities that listeners have, clients or not clients, in this case, about a seminar coming up on a very important issue. It's Social Security, the issue I'm talking about. I guess I should let the cat out of the bag. Last week, we had a segment or a couple of segments on Social Security, or a whole hour, I guess. And the calls it was a live show last week, and we just had call after call after call with question and question and question about Social Security. So I know the seminar was planned before, but after hearing all the calls and the various subjects that the guests discussed, it really shows how complicated the questions about Social Security are, and the various issues. It's not as simple as we think of. You turn a certain age and you sign up. There's a lot of personal decisions to make about when and why and how, right?
We're so glad to offer this to the public, Jeff, because there's nothing you need to sign up for. There's no requirements. Just if you have questions or want to learn more about Social Security and Medicare, you are more than welcome to sign up and attend the webinar. We've got 3 industry experts in this area. Of course, our own Chris Boyd. He's going to talk about Social Security and Medicare just briefly in the context of your financial plan, why it's so important to be considered as part of your financial plan. Marcia Mantell, and she was with you and Chris on the radio program this weekend.
She's great. And, people were hitting her with questions all over the place, and she knew the answers. So
she knows her stuff. There's no doubt. Marcia has several books written on Social Security, and she's also a go-to for some of the Boston area news stations when they want to talk about Social Security. She was just on, I think last week, Morning with Maria. So Marcia's going to be there. She's going to present on some of the things she thinks people should know about with Social Security, but she's also going to, one of the beneficial things we're going to do in the seminar is we're going to open it up for questions. So bring your questions, share what you want to share. It's going to be public, right? But,
right.
But
can I always say my neighbor asked me to ask you.
Yeah, there you go.
I have a friend.
I love it. And then of course, Susan Flanagan, who is with Blue Cross Blue Shield, but she's really an expert on Medicare, and she is their Medicare senior plan consultant. And she does a lot of seminars and webinars for people talking specifically on the area of Medicare.
Right. It's one of the things I don't know if it was on air or off air. It was on air, but I don't remember if I commented on air or off air last week. A caller called in and said, you know, he's about to turn 65 and approaching. Well, he didn't know that he had to sign up for Medicare. That was probably the most important thing that he learned. But outside of the decision when to take Social Security, there's different ages depending on your situation, what works for you, your health and all that, 62, 65, 66, 67, 70, whatever works. But the information is like, so those Social Security decisions are separate, but you need to go and sign up for Medicare, or there'll be some penalties and you might not have the health insurance you think you do. And you go to the Social Security website to do that. I mean, they're intermingled, but they're separate. And it's just so important to have the information before you need it in the context of getting it right, not getting penalized, making the best decision for your long-term finances. And I'm glad that our CEO, Chris Boyd's going to be there to put it in the perspective of how Social Security fits in your financial planning. I mean, if you take it early, you have more cash flow, but you're not going to get the most benefit. Depends on how long you're going to live and other drawing on assets. So this is it's a subject, it's a word that people know, and it therefore that you think you maybe know about it, but there's so much more to it to make the best decision for you.
You know, some of the things, and you're absolutely right, Jeff. Some of the things that Marcia and Susan and Chris are going to be touching on, they're going to be addressing, you know, when are you eligible? Well, when you're eligible and when you start taking Social Security are two different answers. But like you said, Medicare, you have to sign up for that before you're 65.
Right.
How's your Social Security benefit calculated? What if you, you know, Medicare, I think is very complicated, but they'll talk about the different parts of Medicare. Do you have to take all of the parts? Can you take some of them? How do you file for benefits? Like you said, you go to the Social Security website, but it's not all quite as intuitive as you might think. But there, and you kind of alluded to this, Jeff, there are a lot of unique situations too, right? Because what if you are divorced? What if your spouse is deceased? What if you're a teacher? You know, there are different ways you want to go about this depending on your personal situation.
And there's benefits that, you know, people may not have even heard of, like benefits for minor children if a parent has passed away. And benefits, as you said, you could be divorced and haven't seen your ex-spouse in 20 years, but you might be eligible for benefits on their Social Security and so forth. It's just, don't assume, even if you think you know, you should still attend, because I almost guarantee it, I'll guarantee it, that you're going to learn something at that seminar. And, you know, you said it in the beginning, but I want to emphasize, this isn't a sales pitch. There's nothing to be sold to you. We're not trying to sell you a supplement, or we're not trying to, some of these, let's face it, some of these seminars that you see advertised by insurance companies, whatever, they're ultimately trying to sell you a product. I mean, we would love you to come and be a customer of Asset Management Resources if it fits for you, but that's not the reason that we're doing this. This is to inform you about your choices when it comes to Social Security and Medicare, and bringing in outside experts who don't work for Asset Management Resources to answer your questions. Yeah.
Yep. So who are the appropriate people to come to this seminar? I would say really anybody who has an interest in learning more about Social Security and Medicare. I mean, even if you're 30 years old, you might be starting to think about these things.
Well, we had a caller on the show who was 30, and his question was, I'm doing my financial planning. Should I am I going to get Social Security? Should I rely on it? Should I think it's going to be gone by then? How stable is Social Security? Where does it fit in my plan? So yes, I agree. At any decade that you're from, obviously the closer you are to 60, and I would say even if you're on Social Security, it's worth coming in, because you may fit in a category for additional benefits that you're not aware of.
Yep, exactly. I mean, no doubt the sweet spot are people probably 55 to 65 years old, right?
Right.
Because you're getting closer, you're starting to think about, boy, this is becoming real for me. I don't know as much as I need to know about it. So come and hear from the experts, hear all of the years of knowledge that they have regarding these subjects. Ask your questions. And we're going to be together on Tuesday, June 6th from 9 to 11 in the morning. This is going to be at the Courtyard by Marriott, which is, I can never say this.
Ivanhoe.
Thank you. and so the Courtyard by Marriott in Hyannis on that road that Jeff just mentioned. And you can you can register. There's 3 different ways. We tried to make it very flexible for you. You can call us at 508-771-8900. Just give your name. Feel free to bring a friend, a family member, your mother,
Absolutely.
your father, your brother, your sister, whoever you think could benefit from this. We have a link on our website on the homepage. You could just click on it. It takes you right to the registration button. And all you have to do is give us your name and your email address. We're not asking for any more. And then there's also a flyer on our website, and you might see it around in other places, but there's a QR code that you can scan, and that'll take you directly to the registration site.
Thank you, Kathy. I look forward to that. It's going to be very informative, and I know a lot about it, but I still have lots to learn about Social Security and to be able to better serve our clients. So I hope people attend and get the information that's right for them. Kathy, we have about 30 seconds left. I want to do a quick plug that also on our website, amrfinancial.com, under the resources tab, we have a couple of financial planning resource guides. We have one for the people who are approaching retirement, and then we have a fun one about spring cleaning your finances, 10 ways to prepare for retirement, and some tips on is it 40? Yes, it's 40 ways to spring clean your finances. So check those out. They're complimentary as well at amrfinancial.com. And in the second hour, we're going to have Brian Regan, our Chief Investment Officer, on. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Something More with Chris Boyd, Financial Talk Show.
Asset Management Resources, LLC, and J. Christopher Boyd, CFP, provide investment advice on an individual basis to clients only. Proper advice depends on a complete analysis of all facts and circumstances. The information given on this program is in the nature of general financial comments and cannot be relied upon as pertaining to your specific situation. AMR, LLC cannot guarantee that using the information from this show will generate profits or ensure freedom from loss. Listeners should consult their own financial advisors or conduct their own due diligence before making any financial decisions.